Plastic pollution constitutes a planetary crisis with impacts on our ecosystems, biodiversity, climate, and health. There are more than 10,000 unique chemicals used in plastics. Around a quarter of these are potentially dangerous, and human exposure to these chemicals is linked to illnesses such as cancer, diabetes, and reproductive disorders. Plastic is made up of a mixture of different polymers and chemicals, which makes it very hard to recycle plastic waste to be used again for new products. Certain plastic products are particularly prone to littering, such as loss of fishing gear or disposal of single-use products, causing lethal and sublethal effects on marine life. Some countries have already banned or restricted some plastic products, such as plastic bags and single-use items. But this is not enough. The High Ambition Coalition to End Plastic Pollution is committed to developing an ambitious, international, legally binding instrument to eliminate harmful plastics. The Plastics Treaty should require all parties to eliminate and restrict the production and use of polymers, chemicals, and plastic products of concern. Parties must agree on criteria to identify polymers, chemicals, and products that are harmful to the environment and human health, that impede circularity, or are at risk of being released into the environment. All parties should apply import and export requirements on the listed polymers, chemicals, and plastic products, and prohibit the export of these non-conforming items to other countries. Let's end plastic pollution by 2040.
Hi, everyone. I'd like to welcome you to this webinar today on how the new Treaty on Plastic Pollution, which is currently under negotiations, could develop provisions to eliminate and restrict specific plastic polymers, chemicals, and plastic products of concern. So this webinar is organized by the governments of Guinea and Germany with the support of the High Ambition Coalition to End Plastic Pollution. My name is Zainab Sedan, and I'll be your moderator for this session. I work with the Worldwide Fund for Nature, WWF, and I'm based in Cape Town, South Africa. You will find that the webinar has simultaneous interpretation available in both French and English. And actually, our panelists today will be speaking a combination of those languages. So please select the preference of your choice. You should find the interpretation symbol in your meeting controls at the bottom of your screen. So you should be able to select the language of your preference. And currently, we are welcoming a total of 98 participants at this point, and we do expect a few more to join us. We have a great lineup of panelists with us today, and they will be sharing their thoughts and perspectives with us in the next 90 minutes. And just to introduce the panel now. We have Axel with us, the INC focal point for Germany, part of the Federal Ministry for the Environment, Nature Conservation, Nuclear Safety and Consumer Protection. Welcome, Axel. We also have on the panelist Ibrahima from Guinea. He's the INC focal point as well and part of the Ministry of Environment and Sustainable Development. We also have with us on our panel of experts, David from CL, the managing attorney, as well as Honorable Francoise. She's a member of the East African Legislative Assembly. So we'll be hearing more from her later today. And finally, Martin from the Norwegian University of Science and Technology. So we have a great lineup of speakers from government representatives, scientists and academia, law, as well as civil society organizations. So I think it will be quite an interesting discussion discussion today. And of course, we will have time for you all to contribute in the Q&A session right at the end of today's session. So I'd like to now just give many thanks to the participants and the panelists for agreeing to take time off their busy schedules to participate today, and especially as we're preparing for the run-up to INC2 in Paris. There are so many of these dialogues happening, and so we really do thank you all for your time. We would like this event to be interactive. So as I mentioned, there will be a dedicated Q&A session right at the end. And for that, please put your comments or ask any questions to our panelists in the Q&A box. So please write it there. And this can also be found in your meeting controls at the bottom of your screen. You may also use the chat box if you wish. And right at the end, we will have an opportunity for you to raise your hand and also give some live interventions. We'll do our best to address all of your comments and questions. However, we do have limited time. So I'd really love for us to kick off our discussions right now. And to just start us off, I'd like to give the floor over to Erland from the Royal Norwegian Embassy in Nairobi. He's also the coordinator of the High Ambition Coalition to End Plastic Pollution. Please, Erland, over to you.
Thank you very much, Zana. And I just wanted to welcome you all to this webinar of the High Ambition Coalition to End Plastic Pollution, co-hosted by Guinea and Germany. And the High Ambition Coalition is now 53 members, soon to be 54, with a common ambition to end plastic pollution by 2040. And as you saw in the video, co-hosted by the ministers of Norway and Rwanda. This event is a part of a series of Hague webinars on potential provisions in the plastics treaty. So it's the 8th today, and we have been discussing provisions to reduce the production and consumption of primary plastics. We have discussed provisions to enhance the circular economy and provisions on waste management and eliminating release of plastics into nature. And here we are today to continue our discussion on provisions to eliminate and restrict plastic polymers, chemicals, and products of concern. And as I said, this is the 8th in this series, and there's other webinars happening, as Zainab said. And just this week, we have seen the Hague BRS COP side event on chemicals and plastics. And yesterday, there was an INC Secretariat briefing on the science of plastics. And this webinar is also a follow-up from a webinar last week co-hosted by Australia on eliminating problematic plastic products. So here today, we are very much hoping to really get into the details and focus on what needs to happen in the treaty-making process and negotiations on these questions on how to eliminate and restrict plastic polymers, chemicals, and products of concern. So with that, back over to you, Zainab, and I very much look forward to this. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Erland. And I'd just like us to start off the session with really giving an outline of the why. Why do we care about these provisions? Why do we need these provisions to eliminate and restrict specific plastic polymers, chemicals, and plastic products of concern? And I'm going to turn to our experts to really help us frame the why of this question before heading over to our government panelists. So the first question actually goes to you, David. Why is it important that the Plastics Treaty eliminate and restrict specific plastic polymers and chemicals of concern? And should these categories be prioritized?
Merci beaucoup pour l'invitation. Merci beaucoup d'abord pour l'organisation de ce webinaire et pour l'invitation et pour m'avoir donné la parole sur ces questions-là. Je pense que, afin de répondre à la question que vous avez posée sur le pourquoi est-ce se pencher en particulier sur les questions des polymères, des monomères et des substances chimiques problématiques, il est important de revenir à la source et à l'objectif que nous nous sommes fixés et que l'Assemblée des Nations Unies pour l'environnement a fixé pour cette négociation. L'objectif étant de mettre fin à la pollution plastique en adoptant une approche basée sur le cycle de vie. Et à ce titre, je pense qu'il est important de réfléchir et de en tout cas, d'avoir une compréhension commune sur ce qu'est la pollution plastique. Et alors, avant de revenir à cette question-là, je pense qu'il est aussi utile de se pencher sur l'objectif, les objectifs tels qu'ils ont été présentés dans le document d'option qui a été préparé par le secrétariat. Et les objectifs qui ont été fixés par ce traité, c'est mettre fin à la pollution plastique en protégeant la santé humaine et l'environnement contre ces effets néfastes tout au long du cycle de vie du plastique. En tout cas, c'est un des exemples qui a été proposé comme objectif du traité. Et à ce titre, dans ce cadre-là, il est utile de réfléchir à la manière de définir la pollution plastique. À quoi essayons-nous de mettre fin? Et notre compréhension de la définition de la pollution plastique, telle qu'elle est adoptée par un certain nombre d'institutions internationales, de l'OCDE au secrétariat des conventions de Bâle, Rotterdam et Stockholm, la pollution plastique peut être comprise comme l'ensemble des émissions et risques qui apparaissent ou qui se font jour pendant la production, l'utilisation et l'élimination du plastique. Et donc, dans ce cadre-là, il est important de recentrer une partie de la discussion sur les questions de santé. Et on voit que la protection de la santé est un des objectifs critique, un des objectifs clés de cette négociation et de ce futur traité. Et donc, dans ce cadre-là, il est important d'identifier que les sources d'impact sur la santé et sur l'environnement, les sources principales, viennent des constituants de ce qu'est le plastique. Le plastique est constitué de polymères, d'additifs et de substances ajoutées non intentionnellement. Et la majeure partie des impacts sur le climat, la majeure partie des impacts sur la santé et la majeure partie des impacts sur la biodiversité sont le résultat des substances spécifiques, les monomères, les polymères et les produits chimiques que nous utilisons et qui font le plastique. Donc ça, je pense que c'est un des éléments principaux qui doivent nous amener à considérer la restriction et des mesures de contrôle sur ces questions-là. Un élément additionnel, et je finirai par ça, c'est aussi de se pencher sur les études qui ont été faites sur quelles sont les mesures qui pourraient avoir le plus d'impact pour réduire la pollution plastique. Or, dans ce cadre-là, un certain nombre de modèles ont été développés et ont démontré que notre production de plastique actuellement nous fait dépasser les limites planétaires, qui sont les limites dans lesquelles l'humanité peut espérer continuer à opérer et à se développer. Et donc, il est extrêmement important comme ça a été mentionné par Erland au début de en introduction, de limiter la production plastique et la production du plastique et revenir à des niveaux de production qui sont durables et qui respectent les limites planétaires, les limites biologiques de la planète dans laquelle on est. Or, le marché du plastique est avant tout un marché de l'offre et pas un marché de la demande. Ça veut dire que même en limitant la demande ou même en limitant la production ou l'utilisation de produits plastiques, si on ne limite pas la production de résines plastiques, si on n'adopte pas des mesures de contrôle des résines plastiques, des polymères, des monomères et des additifs chimiques, on va se retrouver dans une situation où ces monomères, polymères et additifs vont continuer d'être produits et vont se retrouver dans l'environnement. Et donc, il est extrêmement important de se pencher et de réfléchir à comment réduire cette production et comment éliminer les substances les plus problématiques qui sont les principales causes d'impact, je me répète, sur la santé humaine, sur la biodiversité et sur le climat.
Thank you so much, David, for those interesting insights and really reminding us what the goals of the negotiation of this treaty is, and to also just to add another reminder that we have just over 1.5 years left of this negotiation. So it's really important for us to get into the specifics and the details of what should be included in this treaty. And so thank you, David, for your intervention to really help us get started on this process and how we can prioritize for the biggest impact of the necessary control measures. I now want to hand over the floor to Martin. And this is really a follow-up question to David's on the specific plastic polymers and chemicals of concern. Specifically on the effects of endocrine disrupting chemicals on human and ecosystem health. And I know this is part of your research focus. And so if you can elaborate on that, and specifically on whether certain communities or ecosystems are more vulnerable than others, to really help us understand this problem a bit better. Over to you, Martin.
Thank you so much, and it's a great pleasure to be with you here today. So thanks for the invitation. I just want to re-emphasize that hazardous chemicals in plastic, as well as polymers of concern, really endanger achieving the goals that are set out in the UNEA resolution. And I want to remind everyone of those goals, and these goals are to protect human health and environment from the negative impacts of plastics, as well as to promote a sustainable production of plastic and a sustainable consumption of plastics. And I believe research shows that hazardous chemicals in plastics really imperil achieving those goals, because all those plastic chemicals adversely affect our own health, especially with regards to endocrine disrupting chemicals, but also the environment. So it's really a one health problem here that we are dealing with. Those hazardous chemicals also imperil achieving a transition to a circular economy. And that is really important and often forgotten. Those chemicals will accumulate once we start cycling plastic materials, once we are generating those closed loop systems, and they will accumulate in those closed loops. They will accumulate in plastics, resulting in a higher exposure of humans, but also of nature, to those problematic chemicals. So I think it is crucial that we deal with plastic chemicals in the treaty in some form or the other, and we can talk about how we can do that later. So you've been asking about endocrine disrupting chemicals, and just to maybe remind the audience, endocrine disrupting chemicals are chemicals that interfere with our hormone system. So they're implicated in a wide range of health problems, reproductive problems, developmental problems in humans. You might have heard about problems of infertility, etc., but also metabolic problems. Obesity is a big problem in many parts of the world, and endocrine disrupting chemicals contribute to that rather silent pandemic that we are facing. And yes, one thing is for sure, we are all exposed to those chemicals, right? You've been asking about vulnerable populations. I need to start off by saying there's very solid scientific evidence on some plastic chemicals, bisphenols and phthalates used as plasticizers, that literally everyone on this globe is exposed to them. We have them in our bloods, we have them in our urine. So that is quite certain. And these are very problematic chemicals, but we've also heard in the videos that there's 10,000 other chemicals. We don't have that evidence, but to me as a scientist, even we haven't done all the research on those 10,000 chemicals. It's likely that we are exposed to many more of these chemicals than just bisphenols and phthalates everybody is talking about. Even though everybody is probably exposed to quite a lot of plastic chemicals, there is certain vulnerable groups. And what the science is telling us is that there's intrinsic factors that make people more vulnerable, but also extrinsic factors. So intrinsic factors are age, for instance. So we know that unborn children, infants, adolescents, they're really much more likely to be exposed to plastic chemicals because of their body size, because of their of their rapid development, because of specific behaviors, mouthing behaviors, for instance. We also know that pregnant women, because their physiology is changing so much, are very much vulnerable to those endocrine disrupting chemicals. And then there is people that have other pre-existing medical conditions and elderly people that would be vulnerable to plastic chemicals as well. So these are the intrinsic factors, but the extrinsic factors are really socio-economic. And we know that, and that's not specific to endocrine disrupting chemicals, but to chemical pollution in general, that poverty makes people vulnerable to exposure to those chemicals. Poverty results in multiple stresses that exacerbate the effects of endocrine and other chemicals on our health So it's fence line communities, for instance, that live close to plastic production sites that would be exposed to much higher level to endocrine and other plastic chemicals. And it's also occupational exposures, I must say, that are really relevant here. So it's not only people working in the plastics industry, but also waste pickers, for instance, or people working on landfills that would have much higher levels of those plastic chemicals and thus would be very susceptible to those health effects. So yes, we are all exposed to plastic chemicals. I'm quite certain of that. But we need to look at like vulnerable populations that are specifically susceptible to the health effects. And that makes plastic pollution, plastic chemicals also a global equality question, really. And I think the Plastics Treaty should address that. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Martin, for those important points, specifically emphasizing that the impacts of the plastic pollution crisis needs to also take this life cycle approach, because our impacts are felt from production all the way through to end of life, as you mentioned, with the informal waste sector, for example. And I think that you also helped us understand the fact that the science is there, although we are still expecting some more evidence to build the case and to strengthen the understanding of the impacts as it stands now. And so thank you so much for that inputs. I would now like to turn to Francoise, and specifically, we all know that there are some existing legislation that tries to address plastic products of concern, and we all have heard some single-use plastic policy and legislation being issued, being tried and tested, and possibly having failed as well in certain instances. However, I'd like to ask Honorable Francoise now, why is it important that the Plastics Treaty eliminate and restrict plastic products of concern, and some examples of such products and experiences with policy harmonization or the lack thereof to restrict problematic plastics, and maybe based on your experience specifically in East Africa. Over to you, Francoise.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Zainab Sadan, for the opportunity. I'm really lucky and also humbled for you to have me right now. It's an opportunity and it is a privilege. You know, we are just going through a touching story, as well stated by Mr. Martin and the previous speakers. So me, I'm called Francoise Mukiza, as you said. I'm a member of Parliament East African Legislative Assembly, and I'm the chairperson of the Committee on Agriculture, Tourism and Natural Resources. And I have been involved in this battle of eliminating, ending the harmful effects of plastics, polymers, chemicals, all these related issues of plastics. So I come from Rwanda specifically so that you can understand the background of what I'm telling you. I've been working with Rwanda before as the chairperson of the National Women's Council, whereby I've been working with the schools for this, for the greening, environmental protection with the women to make sure Rwanda, you know, goes green. So I'm just proud, and I would like here to commend the efforts already invested by Rwanda and the efforts being invested so far to make sure Rwanda pushes this agenda forward together with other stakeholders. So thank you very much for the opportunity. Allow me also to say that EALA is one of the 7 organs of the East African Community, EAC, established under Article 9 and 49 of the treaty for the establishment of the EAC as a legislative organ of the community. The Assembly's vision is very important to tell, to be an efficient, effective, and people-centered regional legislator. Its mission is to promote timely legislation, effective oversight, and a broad representation through programs that facilitate a prosperous, competitive, secure, stable, and politically united region in order to enhance the welfare of East Africans. Very important that the treaty under Article 49 bestows upon the Assembly the legislative, oversight, and representative functions of the community on all matters within the purview of EAC. Those are the 3 cardinal functions of any effective assembly. And also, as far as the first question I'm asked about, why is it important that the plastics treaty eliminate and restrict plastic production of concern? It is a very, very important question, because elimination of harmful effects of positive of plastics and polymers waste on our planet is very important. And you know, as well stated by the High Ambition Coalition to end plastic pollution, you know, this latter constitute a planetary crisis with impacts on ecosystem, biodiversity, the climate, and human health. It's not only just for objects, but also human health. You have heard about the previous speakers about, you know, the babies, you know, because of their body size. And the plastic production is set to double in 20 years, and the plastic waste leaking into the ocean is projected to triple by 2040. We are approaching that year without new and effective control measures. And also, why we need this treaty, it's that because we are informed by a factory that is promos.com that the plastic bags are not biodegradable, and when the plastic bags become litter, they pollute oceans, rivers, farmlands, cities, and neighborhoods. Bans eliminate bags, which equals less litter and less pollution. So we need the treaty. The same for other kind of plastic objects, which do not decompose. They break down into small particles and affect animals and humans through bioaccumulation. And also we are informed by UNEP, that is unep.org, that in 2022, they observed that every minute, the equivalent of one garbage truck of plastic is dumped into the ocean. This is a very bad practice that needs to be banned through the provisions of the treaty. The marine litter and the plastic pollution endangers aquatic life, threatens human health, and results in myriad hidden costs for the economy. This was the report of 25th February 2022. And I continue as why it is very important to restrict and also eliminate this. As the Friends of the Earth.uk, plastic sticks around in the environment for ages, not just for some seconds, ages, threatening wildlife and spreading toxins. Plastic also contributes to global warming, climate change. Almost all plastics are made from chemicals, as well stated before, that come from the production of planet warming fuels. Those fuels, we have gas, we have oil, and even coal. We need to stop this. We need to find, what I can say, an approach that is, by togetherness, collaboration. It was also observed, and this is from EAC reports, that the plastics leach toxins and harmful chemicals into soils and waterways, which have a detrimental impact on human health. 5 trillion single-use plastic bags are used worldwide every year. Half of all plastics produced in this is designed to be single use, that you can just throw away anywhere. These single-use plastics are used for just a few minutes, but take hundreds of years to decompose. Up to 12.7 million tons of plastic waste enters our oceans every year. We have Indian oceans at the East African community level and other water bodies. Marine animals ingest or are entangled by these debris, causing injury or death. We need our ecosystem to be protected. By 2050, it's estimated that the ocean will have more plastic than fish. Can you understand this scenario? We can't allow this, and this is the part way. We can't allow this. We have to react, we have to work. So as per the second question, what kind of plastics and the polymer waste to be eliminated in the East African community? I took some cases from 2 countries, Rwanda, by Rwanda being the first initiator of this plastic bags ban, and now the single-use plastic ban was the first country. As we continue to commend the efforts of Rwanda, we also know that Rwanda is including as the EAC waste are but not limited to plastic waste and other polymer waste such as textiles, biomass, and rubber, but not limited to. But as far as Kenya is concerned, as the second good initiator of plastic bans, second country, I'm saying, Kenya Plastic Pact, you have already Kenya Plastic Pact that is available, KPP. For the plastic packaging, they are proposing all polystyrene, this PS, packaging, and then polyvinyl chloride, that is PVC, rigid packaging, and including bottles, expanded polystyrene EPC, plastic packaging for fast foods, polyethylene, terephthalate. These are the scientific names. If I read not correctly, you will bear with me. I'm not a scientific, in terms of plastic, terminologies. And in rigid packaging, secondary plastic cling film on takeaway packaging, those ones. Consumer plastic wrapped around the cans, tins, bottles, and cartons for multi-sales. There is also PETG and the PVC shrinks sleeves on PET bottles. And you have for non-packaging plastics, disposable plastic cutlery, disposable plastic plates and bowls, plastic straws, plastic stirrers, plastic cotton bud stick. And for plastic additives, we have oxo-degradable plastics products, because we can have the alternatives of those materials in a good shape, in a good degradable material. And as far as some experiences with the policy harmonization to restrict problematic single-use plastic in EAC, that plastic pollution is an urgent and global problem. Current responses to this problem are fragmented. Even at EAC level, it's the same. And it can only provide a limited long-term effect on the discharge of plastics into the environment. Now, momentum is increasing to scale up global efforts. Recent studies show that with the current measures, we are only able to reduce marine plastic pollution, a central element of the plastic challenge, by 7%, only 7%, not even 17, just 7%. Plastic production is forecasted to continue growing, and there is the more single-use plastics waste generated than ever before, according to UNEP. And hence, it's paramount for EAC and African countries to join the European Union effort to pave the way for a new global agreement on plastics to support the global shift to a circular economy as outlined in the Circular Economy Action Plan and as mandated by the 5th United Nations Environment Assembly. That is in March 2022, launched the negotiation for a new international legally binding instrument on plastic pollution. The new instrument should address plastic pollution throughout the entire plastics life cycle in order to minimize the mismanagement of plastics and prevent plastic from entering the environment. I'm saying this because I know Rwanda initiated this treaty together with Peru. So we are having the good practice from already EAC as a region. But as far as Rwanda is concerned, we still have a long way to go. I started with EAC countries. Rwanda was the first regional country to adopt a law against plastic bags in 2008. A new and extensive law was gazetted in August 2019, which prohibits the manufacturing, importation, use, and sale of plastic carrier bags and single-use plastic items and other types of plastics deemed equally harmful to the environment. Kenya, after multiple failed attempts to curb plastic bag pollution through duties, standards, and pilot projects, Kenya instituted the world's strictest plastic bag ban in terms of penalties, which is very important. If we are to have provisions of the treaty, we have to make sure we put penalties, because these countries, managers, are not ready to comply. So without penalties, we want to move ahead. In 2017, which has to date achieved a success rate of 80%, Kenya's decision to implement the bans on plastic bags as well as single-use plastics in protected areas was derived by a strong civil society combined with a strong political will. Political will is very important for all, let me say, parties that are ready to go, have signed already the initiative or the agreement. for Uganda, in November 2018, the Ugandan Parliament passed the National Environment Bill 2017, banning polythene bags below 30 microns. Specifically, Clause 75 of the bill regulates importation, manufacture, use, and reuse of some plastics. This is what we need as we go forward for this treaty. In Tanzania, I have written United Republic because they have the mainland and also Zanzibar. The first phase of Tanzania's anti-plastic initiative began in 2017 to protect the youth and the environment. You know, we need to involve the youth. We need to engage women on this, let me call it a battle, because we have the cause for them to be on board. With an initial ban on the manufacture of plastic bags and in-country distribution. These are just, you know, plastic bags, not other initiatives. So we need our countries to go beyond plastic bags because they're not the only harmful, you know, object of plastics. In May 2018, Tanzania announced the implementation of the second phase of plastic bag ban. This second phase came into effect on the 1st of June 2018, and it prohibits the importation, exportation, manufacture, sale, storage, supply, and the use of plastic carrier bags in mainland Tanzania. Burundi, in 2018, Burundi banned the manufacture, import, storage, sale, and the use of all plastic bags and other plastic packaging. In an 18 months transitional period ended in February 2020. Let me tell you that they are still stuck at that level. We need them to move forward. South Sudan joined EAC in 2016. So for your information, the government of South Sudan banned the importation and the use of plastic bags in the country in December 2017, which is good. Just 1 year after they joined EAC. So it's a commendable step, and you want South Sudan to continue because when they were there, we observed the waste. It's terrible. And they know, but they have a willingness to have substitute for plastics, single-use plastics, but they need support. The Democratic Republic of Congo, which joined just last year, the government of the Democratic Republic of Congo has banned the manufacture and the sale of plastic bags and bottles, but implementation remains challenging. Imports of plastic is still allowed. You see how we still have a long way to go. So I have also attached your information as per experience with policy harmonization for Kenya Plastic Pact kept available. You can just visit that site because they also have further information. Is from where I found even those materials that we need to ban. Lastly, it was not a part of the question, but it's a commitment that is very important for the Assembly. We are ready to support this battle as legislators. Humans, animal welfare and environmental protection matter most. Our Earth needs all of us effort to keep it safe and green. We say no to climate change impact. We will bring environmental friendly laws that are people-centered as per the treaty. EAC as a community is people-centered region. Plastic-free is fantastic. All stakeholders, starting from you, because it's just a continuation, should work jointly with us as parliamentarians to make this happen. To add on, ALN Kenya initiative, as I commend their efforts, Flip-Floppy from Tanzania, ICCF, UNCTAD, UK Aid, and all of you support. We will make it. We will bring the treaty to a higher level. And this as soon as possible. Thank you very much. Asanteni sana. Merci beaucoup.
Thank you so much, Francoise, for that intervention. And you really helped us to emphasize the urgency to act on this problem. You've emphasized the fact that existing legislation, even though it's out there and we have leadership from countries such as Rwanda, Kenya, some others that you mentioned, the legislation is still largely fragmented. And so the global treaty can do a lot to help us address this and other gaps from these experiences from the East African community as you helped us understand a little bit more. And who knows what the success rate can look like if we do have global coordination, cooperation, and commitment on this. And so with that, I'd like to now turn over to our government speakers. And first to Axel from Germany. We know that Germany, the EU, and the High Ambition Coalition have all proposed various wording for how to eliminate and restrict plastic polymers and chemicals of concern. And this was also included in the INC Secretariat Options for Elements paper that was recently released. And our experts have also just elaborated on why these measures are important. So my question to you, Axel, is how to address polymers and chemicals of concern in the treaty, and what are some of the potential mechanisms to do this? Again, getting from more abstract to specifics and more detailed understanding of how we can do this. Over to you, Axel.
Thank you. And my regards to all of you. Thanks for listening and asking questions later. So first of all, yes, you gave a good introduction as well on those kind of issues, and I'd like to focus first, apart from what we already have heard, why we are doing that. So we have been discussing a lot about the need for having regulation, having such a treaty, which will then focus on the protection of the environment, not only the marine one, but the whole one. On the other hand, also where we had quite extensive discussion about the human health related issues. So I think there is, and it has been mentioned before, plenty of evidence that there is concern. We still might need further evidence on what especially those concerns might be and what the effects are. That has been heavily debated throughout the past and will be probably still be debated in the future. That's not a question, I think, but the evidence what we have now on the table is plenty, and it's enough to act now on a precautionary principle. The second thing you have been mentioning is about the goal to close gaps, so not duplicate existing processes, but try to especially address those legislative gaps on an international level. And that's the second question we have to ask ourselves. Are there those substances, those polymers, those additives of concern that apply to the whole global community? And I think there are plenty of approaches to cover those aspects. We have been hearing about addressing the life cycle, and therefore I think there are then two big areas we have to address. The first one, what we have been also discussing about, is the chemicals of concern, polymers of concern, being identified and being listed in some kind of way. We'll come to that later, I think. And on the other hand, having a design criteria for having non-toxic cycles and achieving circularity as far as it is possible, and therefore having either mechanisms to phase out the chemicals of concern of those cycles, or on the other hand, enable products being designed in a sustainable manner and being then able to be recycled. What we surely have to do is use the existing systems we have. So there is existing legislation like the Stockholm Convention dealing with persistent organic pollutants. We can build on that. There is the global harmonized systems, and you have been mentioning there are ongoing initiatives on national and supranational level when it comes to, for example, the EU legislation. There is ongoing processes in different areas. One very advanced one is on the REACH regulation, dealing with various kinds of chemicals as well, not only referring to plastics, but that is a mechanism which is well established. On the one hand, we have eco-design criteria, which originally were meant to mainly focus on energy consumption, but there are also initiatives to broaden the perspective, especially also on those issues I have been mentioning. I do think what we also will be needing is a reporting mechanism for also getting an overview of the landscape, which means transparency requirements. We will be needing, when it comes to implementation, then later the indicators and targets we will be aiming to achieve. That might be easier to set targets for phasing out or burning certain substances. Might be a little bit more complicated to have targets for sustainable design criteria. But I do think that is in view that we will establish something like that. And have to then focus on how to get started. Having said that, I think the most important thing is that we do not aim for perfection from the very beginning, but try to follow a start and strengthen approach, meaning that we might be able to already agree on certain categories, certain substances to be reflected in a treaty already before we reach the INC 5, and then we might surely need mechanisms to amend the legislation, the regulations, the control measures we have been laying down in the treaty later on with different mechanisms. We have to discuss about how these could look like. Might it be obligations for revisions by a deadline or something like that? But surely there will be a need for laying down those kind of evolvement and evolution mechanisms to get the necessary amendments of the legislation done. What we should also focus on is try to, as much as possible, group different chemicals or polymers. There may be other approaches when it comes to the products of concern, but at least the chemicals of concern and polymers might be addressed by grouping them as far as possible, also to avoid replacement of chemicals which have been identified on a very specific basis by other ones which are not necessarily more sustainable than the previous one. For example, flame retardants. That might be a very sensible approach to have those kind of groups as far as possible. We will have to also identify the area of applications, also area of exclusions of those approaches there, and the possibility of exemptions for certain applications. There will be need. So what we have to testify is that many of those chemicals, additives are not just added for its own sake, but they have certain functionality. So the mentioned flame retardants I mentioned do have function in, for example, automotive or aviation sector or others. So they can't be just phased out completely, but might be replaced by more sustainable alternatives. And therefore, they may be needed, as well as some exemptions might apply for the chemical sector, chemical medical sector, sorry, where we have special applications to deal with. We will be surely needing terms and definitions. We will be needing a review mechanisms, guidelines, best available techniques, and best environmental practices being established. And therefore, in the medium and long run, we will be needing a dedicated subsidiary body dealing with those issues. Still, as I have said, trying to use existing knowledge, existing mechanisms as far as possible, and not duplicating the work which already has been done. There are different kinds of approaches you can imagine laying down those provisions I've mentioned. One of the most promising one when it comes to chemicals and polymers of concern probably will be using annexes, which can be amended easier than if we would focus on having all the provisions laid down in the treaty itself. There are also different approaches of how to list chemicals and polymers of concern, about positive lists, about negative lists. Both of those approaches have their pros and cons. For positive lists, you might need a huge amount of data to assess them all. On the other hand, when you talk about a negative list, there's always the danger of missing out certain substances and therefore not addressing them. So probably in the end, it will be some kind of hybrid approach we end up. That yet has to be discussed, and we have to have the proper consultation with all those experts, which we are starting now, and laying out the process ahead will be also of utmost importance for getting at least a good starting point in, as you have mentioned, the very limited time we have left until 2024, and hopefully then being able to have substantial provisions also on these kind of issues apart from we have been discussing before. So that would be my input for the discussion later on, and happy to answer further questions later. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Axel. I like how you mentioned that we do need to use and acknowledge and recognize the existing mechanisms that are already out there, the existing systems and the existing legislation, and really build on that, and how the global treaty can close some of that gaps. I also acknowledge your reference to a start and strengthen approach, and how we need to include mechanisms in the treaty now to ensure that it can be strengthened at a later stage and be amended. And finally, I also like your contribution on the annexes and how a hybrid approach might be the way forward. So thank you so much for that. And I'd like to turn over now to Ibrahima from Guinea, coming from your perspective from the African group, the High Ambition Coalition, and of course your national context. My question to you is really how to address plastic products of concern in the treaty, and what are some of the potential mechanisms to do so? Axel already gave us some insights on chemicals and polymers of concern, and so my question to you is really on the plastic product specifically. So over to you, Ibrahima.
Merci de m'avoir donné la parole. Très heureux. Je remercie d'abord les premiers intervenants. Merci la Françoise quand on dit de protéger les enfants, de protéger les femmes et trouver la façon comment aider l'Afrique de l'Ouest. C'est très important. Merci Hélène aussi quand il dit comment former la liste des substances négatives. Ça, c'est très important. Mais je voudrais vous mettre à l'aise, mais je parle sous le contrôle de mon ministre de l'Environnement et du Développement durable, qui est représenté ici par Dr Karim Samoura, le député ministre du ministère de l'Environnement et du Développement durable de la Guinée. D'abord, je vais vous mettre à l'aise pour dire que la Guinée estime que le traité sur les plastiques est une étape essentielle pour réaliser des progrès significatifs en matière de protection de la santé humaine, de la santé des êtres vivants et aussi de la protection de l'environnement. Donc, pour ce faire, le traité doit penser sur 3 principes fondamentaux que je vais vous dérouler sans développer et avant effectivement de faire une déclaration sur la chose. En première position, les plastiques sont un mélange de carbone et de produits chimiques. Et ensuite, le traité devrait effectivement aborder les effets nocifs sur la santé des substances chimiques préoccupantes dans les plastiques. Et en troisième position, reconnaître que les produits chimiques toxiques rendent les plastiques presque, s'il faut dire, incompatibles ici avec une économie circulaire. Pour ce faire, mes remerciements vont d'abord, mes sincere thanks to High Ambition Coalition to end plastic pollution for convening this important conference. And of course, my appreciation to the government of Germany, WWF, the Ministry of Environment, and the government of Guinea. Our world, in particular, ocean is being destroyed by the plastic pollution. At least half of world oxygen comes from the ocean, mostly produced by plankton. Microplastics affects the ability of these organisms to grow and reproduce, leading to the loss of ocean oxygen. Not only in this a danger to plants and animals, but it is also poses a threat to the climate, and plastic releases greenhouse gases that is slowly breaks down sunlight and heat causes. It releases methane and ethylene, which causes global warming. We are here today because of economic reasons that manufactures plastic products from petrochemicals and durable materials. Only to do them as through this disposal has zero cost. But there is a cost to the whole society and the environment. The cost of waste collection, health impacts, and environmental destruction amount to trillions of dollars. To free our world from this pollution, we need to keep plastics circulating in the economy where they bring value, not on ocean currents, where they cause harms. We should drastically reduce the volume of polymers, plastics, and chemicals entering our ocean as soon as possible, and also lower plastic production. Colleagues, we must all play a part in achieving this reduction. This is very vital, but the government sets the rules of the game. So the role is paramount. And so the government can take the following key measures. 1, eliminate plastic products that are unnecessary and problematic. This can be achieved through banks and encourage sustainable alternatives. 2, ensure that circular economy is partial parts of the solution to plastic and chemical pollutions. Plastics need to be useful and recycled. They requires significant investment in collects and reprocessing infrastructure. A circular economy cuts the volume of plastics entering our oceans by 80% each year, according to the Ellen Foundations. Three, high-risk-based solution must be applied in order to identify and prioritize high-risk plastics that must be quickly addressed by the treaty. This may be done by categorizing plastics production based on their purposive uses and risk in relation to pollution, probability, and possible harms. Regulations such as phase reduction, mandatory criteria, and standards according to the sustainability, and socioeconomic feasibility for each of prioritize products must be applied. We need government, business and investor. We need civil society and individual actions. Plastic and chemicals are not bad, but it is how we misuse them that causes problems. So that let us use them the right way. And thank you.
Thank you so much, Ibrahima, for that intervention, specifically your suggestion on looking at a risk-based approach to categorizing some of the plastic products, and then also some potential mechanisms for elimination, phase reduction, and some mandatory criteria standards, some of which was also mentioned by Axel. We had such a rich contribution from all our panelists. However, I would like to now change over to our audience to really help us to answer some of your questions based on what was said. And then I also do invite our experts to comment on each other's interventions, as that was also not done in the time allocated. So you're welcome to comment on what the other speakers have said, and also your views on these potential mechanisms to be implemented in the treaty. For those of you who still would like to put some questions in the Q&A box, I also would like to ask if you also put in who you would like the question to be addressed by from our panel of experts and governments, so that it'll be easier to help floor the questions. So we have about 20 minutes now to answer some of your interesting questions. I know some of our panelists has already been answering them in the Q&A. So we'll cover some of those that weren't answered yet, and then we'll head to those that have been answered. I'll take a few now, and then for those of you who would like to answer or ask questions live, I also would like you to raise your hand so that we can also hear from some of you and contribute in that way. All right, so I'm going to start off with this question from Shannon Mead. And I'll read it out now. So as part of protecting human health from plastic and in line with avoidable and problematic plastics, the news out of Belgium last week is that the Superior Health Council advised the Environment Minister that plastic tobacco filters do not provide any health benefit for smokers and are therefore considered unnecessary. She specifically asked, is the HAC open to taking this position into INC2 and beyond? And while our panelists are not speaking speaking on behalf of the hack, I would like to ask both Axel and Ibrahima, as members of the hack, what are your thoughts on this? So first I'll turn over to you, Axel.
Thank you so much. And therefore we deal more with problematic products, I would say. And at least from my point of view and our point of view, we can say that in the single-use plastics directive at European level, there is already regulation on tobacco filters and cigarette filters, cigarette butts in there. Especially therefore, I do think that's worthwhile considering adding those kind of products to a list. And I would argue that, for example, cigarettes are surely a worldwide concern, apart from the health issues from the cigarette itself, but also from the impacts of cigarette butts as waste. That's for me, it's out of question. So there, it should be at least considered to be added in the discussions from my value. Thank you.
Thanks, Axel. And Ibrahima, do you have anything to add to that question? Ibrahima, you are still on mute.
OK. Je pense qu'il a dit l'essentiel par rapport à cette question. Les experts doivent en principe se retrouver pour en débattre là-dessus et approfondir très bien ces questions des produits chimiques. Surtout quand nous savons que les plastiques sont constitués de plus de 10 000 produits dont les un quart sont toxiques. Alors donc, il y a vraiment une question d'approfondir ce sujet. Merci.
Thank you. And I see, David, you'd like to contribute here. Please go ahead.
Merci beaucoup. Et
Okay.
je ne peux évidemment pas me prononcer ou parler au nom de la coalition de haute ambition ou au nom des différents pays qui la composent. Mais en tout cas, je peux souligner que c'est quelque chose qui est très fort. Le point qui a été soulevé est fortement porté par l'ensemble des associations de la société civile, pour soutenir en tout cas pour adopter l'ensemble des approches possibles qui peuvent renforcer les approches du traité. Donc, dans ce cadre-là, adopter une approche combinée qui se focalise et sur les substances toxiques, les polymères, les monomères et les additifs tels qu'on en a parlé aujourd'hui, et éventuellement aussi un certain nombre de produits. Je pense que c'est très important de ne pas opposer ces deux approches, mais de voir à quel point elles peuvent être complémentaires. Au sein de la société civile, il y a différentes approches qui sont adoptées et une insistance très claire sur le fait que les mesures qui auront probablement le plus grand impact sur la réduction des risques et sur la réduction des impacts négatifs sur la santé, sur le climat et sur la biodiversité sont les mesures qui viseront à éliminer les substances les plus toxiques. Et alors, il y a un certain nombre de mesures qui ont été présentées par Axel sur la manière de le faire. J'ai répondu aussi à une question sur le sujet. La première question sur le sujet qu'on peut trouver dans les questions et réponses qui permet d'apporter un petit peu plus d'éléments. Sur la question du tabac en particulier, je pense qu'en plus de ce qui a été mentionné dans la question, il y a d'autres éléments que nous pouvons retenir ou d'autres leçons que nous pouvons apprendre des mesures internationales qui ont été adoptées pour limiter les impacts négatifs du tabac sur la santé. Il y a notamment une convention cadre de l'OMS sur la réduction du tabac. Et une des mesures phares ou une des mesures qui assure le succès de cette convention, c'est l'exclusion des industriels qui ont un intérêt, qui produisent du tabac pour de l'ensemble des discussions et des mesures de mise en œuvre du traité qui a été adopté. Et je pense que là, c'est aussi quelque chose auquel nous devons réfléchir dans la manière dont on négocie le traité et dans la manière dont le traité va être mis en œuvre, c'est adopter des mesures qui vont empêcher les conflits d'intérêts et qui vont empêcher l'influence des industries qui ont un intérêt particulier à continuer à produire les résines plastiques ou les substances toxiques. Ça a été fait dans le cadre de cette convention du tabac et je pense que c'est extrêmement important d'apprendre de ces leçons et d'inclure ces mesures-là aussi dans la manière dont on négocie le traité. J'ai 2 ou 3 autres éléments plus spécifiques sur la manière dont on pourrait mettre en œuvre tout ce dont on a discuté aujourd'hui, notamment dans le cadre de la réunion qui vient à Paris, mais je veux laisser un petit peu de place, donc je vous laisserai peut-être soulever d'autres questions et puis je prendrai peut-être la liberté de reprendre la parole avant la fin du webinaire.
Thank you so much, David, for that interesting intervention as well. I have now a question from Mr. Jean-Marie Bope-Bope-Lapoing, who is the INC focal point of the DRC. And while his question is in French, I'm going to read it in English. Now, the elimination of plastic must be principle. However, it's necessary to categorize them and define the modalities for the elimination. And the replacement or the substitution of these plastics that should be eliminated or banned remains the question. And so, Martin, I wonder if you'd like to add some insights on this, specifically in terms of the unintended consequences of bans, what socioeconomic, environmental, and human health considerations do we need to take into consideration? Over to you, Martin.
Thank you so much for that question. Maybe to start with, I really just want to emphasize what I consider crucial elements of the treaty with regards to problematic chemicals and polymers. I think there's 3 main elements that the treaty needs to consider. The first one is creating transparency on plastic chemicals and polymers. The second one is phasing out the most hazardous plastic chemicals and polymers. And the third one is really to promote the development of non-toxic plastics. And we have like principles we can apply there, for example, chemical simplicity. So having a limited number of chemicals and plastics, essential use. So using only those chemicals and polymers that we indeed need. And we have safe by design principles. And I think it's really key that all of these 3 measures are adaptive, they're flexible, because not only the science is evolving, but also the polymer chemistry is evolving, right? So there's like new chemicals being used in plastic all the time. So it's a very dynamic kind of economy. So it needs to be adaptive. And these elements need to be informed by independent science. And I think that's a matter that needs to be considered in the negotiations as well as in the treaty. Because why is it that we haven't phased out the most problematic plastic chemicals for more than 3 decades? Bisphenol A or phthalates, for instance. It is not because the science is not ready. It's not because like there's no scientific consensus on the harm of these chemicals, but because the plastics and the petrochemical industry manufactured doubt on the science. So they inflated the uncertainties in the science. They created own science that contradicts independent science. They even attacked scientists and independent science. So I think we have an opportunity as well as an obligation in the plastic treaty to really tackle that issue of that outsized influence of the petrochemical industry on the science on plastic chemicals and polymers and their negative health and environmental consequences. Now, coming to the question of how we can really kind of prioritize chemicals and polymers of concern, the most important step that we must take is to reduce the chemical complexity by grouping plastic chemicals and polymers. And that has been mentioned before, just to emphasize again. The recent UNEP report published like this week emphasizes that we have more than 30,000 chemicals that we know are being used in plastic. On top of that, there is an unknown number of what we call non-intentionally added substances. So the number of chemicals in plastic is probably much higher. We don't know exactly how many polymers we have on the market, but again, the number of polymers there is staggering. So we need to, in the treaty, reduce that complexity by grouping chemicals of concern, bisphenols, phthalates, organophosphates, flame retardants, etc. And then we need to regulate those groups of chemicals, because that will not only simplify prioritizing, but it will also preempt the problem of regrettable substitutions. And that is just changing a tiny bit on a chemical to prevent it from being regulated, but having then the same hazards and same negative health and environmental impacts. So grouping will be key to attack or to tackle the problem of these large numbers of chemicals, and it can be done based on chemical structure. I think that the methods, the scientific tools are there. Chemicals and polymers of concern can be prioritized based on existing frameworks that we're having. GHS was mentioned before, so we have officially recognized hazard criteria, persistence of chemicals, bioaccumulation of chemicals, toxicity of chemicals, including endocrine disruption, but also carcinogenicity, so chemicals causing cancer, and other modes of toxicity that can be used to prioritize those groups of plastic chemicals. And then as soon as we have enough evidence for certain members of that group of chemicals to be of concern, the whole group should be regulated. And that would really motivate also the petrochemical industry to innovate and come up with safer plastic chemicals. For polymers, we can use similar criteria. For instance, the toxicity of monomers that are used to make the plastic, or other chemicals that are used to make a certain type of plastic, as well as kind of the proneness of a certain plastic type to absorb chemicals from the environment, its ability to degrade in the environment, and thereby releasing nano and microplastics. That's something that we need to consider as well as like compatibility with reuse and recycling. So we can create negative lists of priority groups of chemicals, but also of priority polymers based on these existing frameworks. We just need to do it. Positive lists are more tricky, as Axel mentioned before, because we need to come up with a testing framework and requirements for showing that a chemical that's been used in plastic is considered as safe as possible. Absolute safety will never be achieved, but as safe as possible. We have existing frameworks for testing for endocrine disruption, for example, that could be deployed. And I believe if we combine those negative and positive list approach that should be legally binding in the treaty, we would also really create incentive to move towards redesigning polymers, chemicals, and plastics to become non-toxic. And that is something that is really a vision that we should strive for. It's not only getting rid of the most problematic materials and chemicals, but we should incentivize a system that builds better materials. And just to come back to one thing that Axel highlighted, I think there's a strong focus on sustainability of new materials. There's a lot of discussion on bioplastics, for instance. And in those discussions, we focus on the carbon footprint, on land use, etc. And we are often forgetting safety of those materials and the toxicity of the chemicals in those materials. And we did research, for instance, showing that bioplastics contain toxic chemicals to a similar extent as petroleum-based ones. So I think we need to find a way to reconcile sustainability criteria for new materials and chemicals with safety criteria. And the European Chemicals Agency has developed a framework to combine both aspects and assist the development of non-toxic materials and chemicals in the future. And I think that's something that the treaty needs to consider as well. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Martin. And I do note that we are short on time, so we have 5 minutes left of the session. So I would like, I see a few hands from my panelists who'd like to also contribute here. And I'll just ask you now just to keep your interventions very brief. David, followed by Ibrahima and Françoise. Go ahead.
Merci beaucoup, Zeynab. Et je dois dire que mon intervention va être facilitée par le fait qu'un grand nombre des points que je voulais soulever vient d'être soulevé par l'expert scientifique de ce panel, Martin Wagner, et avait déjà été soulevé par aussi le représentant allemand. Alors, peut-être pour revenir au cœur ou pour insister principalement sur un certain nombre d'approches clés, je pense qu'une des premières approches pour arriver aux objectifs que nous nous fixons et dont nous discutons, c'est de baser notre travail sur une approche liée à la toxicité et non une approche sur les risques. L'approche sur les risques est extrêmement dépendante de données et d'informations sur les niveaux d'exposition qui sont généralement très compliquées à obtenir et qui sont manquantes. Et donc, c'est extrêmement important d'adopter une approche basée sur la toxicité, hazard approach, plutôt qu'une approche liée sur les risques. Le deuxième élément qui est extrêmement important, c'est d'adopter une approche de groupement, de grouping, et apprendre une fois encore de ce que nous ne réussissons pas forcément à faire avec les instruments existants, qui consiste à traiter les produits chimiques un par un, produit substance par substance. On sait que ça, c'est une des sources principales de substitution regrettable, et donc, une fois encore, c'est extrêmement important, et ça, ce sera un élément clé de s'assurer que nous avons une approche liée à des groupes de produits chimiques. Et comme Martine l'a présenté avant, il y a déjà extrêmement d'informations qui sont liées, qui existent et qui nous permettent d'agir sur cette question-là. L'idée de combiner des approches interdiction et autorisation particulières, la combinaison de liste noire et de liste blanche, est aussi une approche extrêmement importante. Rien de tout ça ne peut se faire sans des mesures très claires de transparence. Aujourd'hui, comme ça a été souligné dans le chat par un certain nombre de personnes, il y a un manque d'informations flagrantes sur les substances qui sont utilisées dans les plastiques. Or, on ne peut pas réglementer des choses dont on ne connaît pas l'existence. Et ça a un impact sur la circularité, ça a un impact sur les travailleurs. Afin de permettre d'adopter des mesures adéquates, il est extrêmement important que le traité adopte des mesures très claires sur les questions de transparence. Je finis en focalisant un petit peu sur la réunion qui arrive à Paris dans les semaines qui viennent et en identifiant un certain nombre de points auxquels nous devrons penser sur comment organiser notre travail pour nous permettre d'arriver à ces objectifs. Je pense que la première chose, c'est de se baser sur le document d'options qui a été présenté par le secrétariat, mais peut-être d'organiser les options d'une manière un petit peu différente de ce qui est présenté dans le document aujourd'hui et plutôt de les articuler autour des différents stades du cycle de vie du plastique. La deuxième chose qui me semble important de commenter sur la manière dont on va organiser nos travail à Paris et au-delà, c'est que les approches volontaires et les approches juridiquement contraignantes comme équivalentes. Il nous semble que d'abord, ce n'est pas une bonne réflexion, une bonne représentation des soumissions qui ont été faites par les pays. Les approches volontaires n'ont été soulevées que par un très petit nombre de pays et que pour un certain nombre d'approches. Or, il nous semble que la négociation, parce que nous n'avons pas beaucoup de temps, devrait se focaliser essentiellement sur les obligations juridiquement contraignantes. Il y a toujours la place de développer des approches volontaires en dehors de la négociation du traité, mais vraiment le traité et notamment les discussions à Paris devraient se concentrer sur ce point-là. Et enfin, le document d'option identifie les questions de santé publique comme un point à part, comme un point séparé qui devrait faire l'objet d'une disposition particulière. Nous pensons au contraire qu'il est important que les questions de santé publique soient traitées comme une question transversale qui informe l'ensemble des mesures et l'ensemble des dispositions qui seront intégrées dans le traité, et donc en faire une question transversale à l'ensemble des étapes du cycle de vie et pour traiter l'ensemble des questions, et en particulier la restriction des monomères, polymères ou additifs. Merci beaucoup et désolé d'avoir été un peu...
Thank you, David. Ibrahima. Ibrahima, you are on mute still.
Thank you, Zainab, to give me. I just would like to introduce the Deputy Minister because he have to go somewhere. Okay, Mr. Samura, Dr. Samura. Okay, Dr. Samura, you have the floor. Ok. Je pense qu'il est parti. Il n'est pas en ligne. Il est parti, c'est bon. C'était juste pour lui permettre de placer un mot par rapport à ce vraiment meeting. Merci. Merci Zainab.
Of course, and apologies for missing that opportunity. Francoise, over to you. And I again want to ask you to keep it brief.
Okay, thank you very much. Advice and the guidance noted. Zainab, don't you think that it's very important that I ask, the panelists and all of you here present, that as a legislator representing EAC as a region here, and also as an assembly, we need these concerted efforts. So I have to talk about some laws that are ongoing. For instance, in 2017, the EAC Legislative Assembly, EALA, passed the EAC Polythene Materials Control Bill, and this one incited the partner states to start banning the plastic bags. It was ongoing. It's not a fully assented to by head of state, but it's a follow-up. We were assigned to make a follow-up under the committee on the chairperson. And then, Zainab, there is also a pressing and urgent need for further collaborative actions to be taken by East African policymakers. We are not working as a single region committee because we work with our national parliamentarians as well. Very important because we have 7 countries, then we have 7 national parliaments with lower chambers and upper chambers, and then the region. And for this, ALN Kenya, as I already commended them, initiated a bill, and that bill is under development. So I raised my voice so that you can take it up to work jointly, because we're trying to see some provision of the treaty that will help partner states to improve on their practices, to have good practices. And this, if you allow me, I will share the bill afterwards, so that you can look through its provisions before it's taken to the assembly, but it is still under negotiation. What I'm requesting you is to improve, to even amend, to add on some provisions that are likely to help East African community. We have some prohibition on the manufacture, import, sales, use, spilling, and disposal of specific single-use plastic products set out in the bill. We have the various environment authorities who will be required to put in place the mechanisms for the collection, segregation, and recycling of specific single-use plastic products. And we have requirements by each partner state to ensure clearly visible and legible marking on the packaging of plastics that can be used, information on appropriate waste management options, and so on. We have stringent requirements for those who manufacture, for instance, import, sell, and use permitted single-use plastic products. We have measures by partner states to sustainably reduce the consumption, and we have emphasis on awareness. We have incentives for activities aimed at controlling pollution caused by single-use plastic waste, and so on. Those are issues and also responses and solutions we need the treaty to consider and also take up to allow harmonization and smooth transition to elimination of these harmful plastics and polymers. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Francois, for that. Now we are reaching the end of our session today, and I would just like Ibrahima and Axel, if you'd like to share your closing thoughts before we close today. So Ibrahima, please go ahead.
Merci beaucoup Zainab, je suis très content et je crois que ça a été une très belle session. Et je donne effectivement cette parole à Axel de l'Allemagne qui va donner la conclusion. Merci.
Thank you so much. And first of all, perhaps I'd like to take the freedom to answer one of the questions I have seen in the Q&A section, and that was on what do we do? And perhaps this is also then concluding, or at least trying to conclude, what do we do with them? I paraphrase it a little. What do we do if the measures are not sufficient, or what do we do if member states are not doing enough to reach the goals? And that is, I think, one very general aspects we have to deal with in the treaty as such, and that comes down to compliance mechanisms. I do think, coming from the very end of the whole negotiations, that this is a vital part of the whole negotiations, to have not only ambitious regulations, control measures in there, but also the means to really assess whether or not they are effective and whether or not they are implemented. That is something very important. What lies ahead of us is quite a lot of work, I would say, and most importantly, using the time we have to the degree as much as possible. That is, I think, the task ahead, which I do look forward to, and this not only in kind of the very few weeks until INC2, but with a view that we all hope that there will be ambitious mandate given to the chair of the INC to draft the zero draft. There will be a huge task during the intersessional period to advance on those issues, to support the work of the INC, especially the chair, as far as we can, and with substantial information. And having that as an outlook, I do think that this kind of exchange we had just now won't be surely the last one, and therefore I was happy to have you all there and have this feedback from your side as well. And for me, it's always the case that I learn such great deal during those exchanges. I'm grateful for that, and with that I give back to you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Axel, and to all our panelists for sharing your thoughts, your perspectives, and some insights as we prepare for Paris INC2. And I want to also just apologize to those participants who we didn't get to answer your questions today, and we also didn't get to hear from you live due to time constraints. But I do hope that this conversation continues in our next webinar and also in other engagements as we prepare for INC2 and also during. And so I would now like to finally thank colleagues at Grid Arendal who have organized today's event. Lars and other colleagues, thank you so much. And for Nadia to allow us interpretation, as we had a mix of English and French speakers today. It certainly helped me and made my job a lot easier. And I lastly just want to thank everyone for making this discussion quite interactive and engaging. I definitely learned a lot and took away a lot of insights and thoughts. The learning does not end here. And so I do offer you the opportunity to get engaged outside of this platform. And with that, I'd like to close the session today. Thank you so much and farewell. I hope to see some of you in Paris. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye.